Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Thank you for listening to Your Working Life, my podcast series featuring thought leaders in the career and personal growth arena. You spend a significant portion of your life at work, so I'm on a mission to provide you with tools, inspiration, and resources so you can enjoy your career and love your life. And I am delighted to welcome my special guest to the show today, Joanna Krotz. Joanna, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here, Caroline.
I am delighted, and I want to tell our listening audience a bit about you, and then we're going to launch into a juicy conversation. Joanna Krotz has been investigating the payoffs and challenges of small business owners, particularly women-led firms, for years. She's interviewed hundreds of male and female entrepreneurs as a national magazine editor, author and journalist, online small business columnist, and host of a web radio show. Joanna has also contributed to Fox Small Business Center, Entrepreneur.com, MSN Small Business, Women 2.0, Town and Country, the Oprah Magazine, and New York Times. So, Joanna, welcome. Let's get started right off the bat. You know, there's so much focus on gender differences. Is this counterproductive in the end game, or is this something that we should still be talking about?
I think it's very productive. I think if we respect the differences the sexes have and actually acknowledge that there are differences, which is the first step, will go a long way toward building bridges of parity and also understanding. Pretending that there are no differences, I think, is what's gotten us into hot water in the first place. And it's become politically correct somehow to say there are none. But that does not mean one sex is more equal than another. It's like saying red is better than green. They're just different.
They're just different. You know, it's interesting. I read an interesting piece the other day about gender neutrality and how we might consider just identifying as professionals in the workplace. But wouldn't it be better to dwell on how men and women are similar or alike in a professional setting than how we are different?
I think there should be some emphasis on how we are the same, but what gets us into trouble are the divergencies. So there is I'm specifically dealing with the workplace and the office, not so much with relationships or romance or home-based kinds of conflicts, but professional, exactly. And so in the office, if someone says something that is a female sort of tilt to it, which is either asking a question that the male boss isn't ready for, or a male subordinate who goes off and does a job without a task, without checking with his female supervisor, both of which tend to be sex characteristics, we could get into deep water.
Yeah, I agree. So let's unpack those differences. So in your research and understanding, what's the single biggest difference in the way that men communicate compared to women in the workplace?
I think a lot of it has to do with leadership and management and what the sexes expect from each other when one is a subordinate and the other is a supervisor, and vice versa. So, for instance, women like to be collaborative and consensual, and they will create teams, which they don't often get as much credit for as they should. They somehow develop the stereotype that boys play sports and women don't, and therefore they're team builders. But I see that as competitive and men's inculcation into winning rather than team building. And on the male side, men tend to lead by rewarding results. So it's much more transactional, much less consensual. And both those things get each sex into trouble with the other. When men are only rewarding as based on results, women tend to be offended or confused or hurt or insulted. On the other side, when women are trying to be consensual or collaborative in building a team, men see them as weak and not tough enough. They lack the chops for whatever boss job they're in line for. So I think it does create confusion. And if we understood a bit about how the other reacts, those misunderstandings would dissolve.
So how does one pursue understanding the opposite sex? And let me give you a very particular scenario. So let's say the boss is a woman and her subordinate, her direct report, is a man. How do they go about figuring out their communication style?
Well, again, and this is what I refer to as the Miranda warning, there's no such thing as 100% male or 100% female. We all have parts of each other, parts of the other sex on the continuum. Lately, of course, there's been a great deal of talk about gender identity, I guess you'd call it. So we have transgender, we have people who are
True.
women with testosterone, men have estrogen. There isn't necessarily a pure male or pure female. So everyone mixes it up. On the other hand, there's been a lot of studies, both biologic and, of course, sociological, that show that there are these differences. Now, when it gets to the office and a male boss is talking to a woman subordinate, he might let her speak longer than he would typically use for another male, a male subordinate. Women's going to ask a lot of questions. She's validating. She's looking for reassurance. She may be trying to add value to a project. Tends to be women look at the details much more in depth than men do. Men cut to the chase. And if you reverse that, it's the other way around. If it's a woman supervisor with a male subordinate, she should probably be a little more not abrupt, but a little more clear cut, a little quicker to get to the goal.
I've heard you talk in the Woman's Playbook about how conversations go off the rails, for example, when men and women try to sell their point with anecdotes or narratives or personal experiences to get their point across. So why is this such a big deal? Because there's clearly a difference in the sexes and in how we tell stories.
Yes, and narratives really sell, whether internally or externally, so much better than the facts, right? We do love to hear that emotionally binding kind of story. Those are effective whether you're female or male. And the kinds of stories we tell will tend to be gender-based, or the kind of metaphors we use. Let's kick it across the goal line. Let's really bake this cake. These are the kind of anecdotes that tend to be jarring to the other sex if it's male or female based. So women tend to use home-based, relationship-based metaphors and anecdotes. Contrarily, men tend to talk in metaphors of battle and sports and competition. And it doesn't necessarily translate to the other. If I'm sitting in some office and listening to some guy saying, we're going to kill him, let's go out and kill him, I'm like, whoa, this is
that's
way
aggressive.
Very aggressive for. And the anecdote I'd like to tell about this is a true story I heard from a woman who does media training, who had a male client who went through her course, and there was still some things she felt he could benefit from. So she asked him to re-up in terms of the training, and she put the extra addition of training as what would be icing on the cake. And of course, the guy said, ooh, that's that sticky sweet stuff that's completely unnecessary, and I don't want it.
Wow.
So that was the end of that. That was the end of it. And she learned a lesson. My advice is to try and use gender neutral metaphors and stories, things from nature, things from the culture, pop songs, movies.
Is there an example off the top of your head? Perhaps I'm putting you on the spot, but I'd love to hear one, because I hear these gender anecdotes so frequently, and I'd love to know how to neutralize that.
Well, you could say the wind is behind our sails. You could say we're going to take off and soar like a bird.
Very good.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think either is except if men sail more, but I don't think that's the case.
But I hear what you're saying. So those are more neutral, acceptable illustrations that don't default from one side to the other for male or female.
We're going to lose the trees if we don't see the forest.
Yeah. Stick with nature.
Or
oh
it's
my
just
goodness.
like, it's just like some movie. And that could be tricky depending on whether it's a chick flick or not. But you understand what I mean.
I do. So what about the feeding of stereotypes, Joanna? That women are soft and emotional, and that men are aggressive or tough on decision making. Is that true? And should we continue to separate men and women with those distinctions?
There is some evidence to show that women can actually endure pain, physical pain, longer than men do.
Wow. Perhaps that's physiological, right?
Yeah, I don't know. But aside from that, that's not going to happen. Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Let's hope. Right.
I think women actually will absorb bad news and a failure on the part of a team or subordinate more quickly than men will, because that idea of winning is so strong in men. And then if they fail, they're off a cliff. Women tend to rebound more quickly and will put the team together and say, okay, let's go. I know one woman who worked in at a big .com, a women's community, online community, and she watched a younger guy, give a presentation that completely fell flat, and his boss just cut him off at the knees. Just, you're a complete failure. A woman boss, she thought, and I would agree, would say, okay, we lost that one. What do we need to do to regroup? And I think that's so much tougher. I think that's so much harder to do than to just blame the person next to you or the one who has no power. And of course, the power is important. So I don't think toughness is necessarily gender-based. And if it is, the male version of it doesn't tend to be very productive.
Would you agree, or have you discovered in your investigation that women fester and percolate on things longer than men do? Men sort of let it go. They fight, they move on, and women, it's reminiscent of the kids on the playground. The girls will carry the issue throughout the day, and the boys will have forgotten about it by the time recess is over.
Yeah, I would agree with you. To use the boy metaphor, girls tend to take the ball and go home. So I'm not sure why that is. It certainly is something I have observed and I have seen as well. Perhaps women are more thin-skinned because they're judged more acutely than men are. Perhaps they're more emotional because either they are that way, or they've been told to be that way, or they have more leeway. Men are told to suck it up. Women can burst into tears, and it isn't necessarily the end of their reputation. But yes, I wish women would get over it more quickly. And I think some of that might have to do with men's competition. You're going to lose some. The only way you can learn about winning is to actually acknowledge that you can lose.
Yeah. And I think women are becoming more comfortable with failure. It's taking time, but culturally it's becoming more acceptable.
I think so. I think so as well. We'll see how this develops.
Yes.
And I think when you have integrated teams, men and women co-ed teams working together, you have a much stronger unit. There have been several studies that show that when women are on the executive side of decision making, whether in small businesses or in large corporations, actual ROI and profits go up.
Excellent. So you've investigated differences between men and women when it comes to negotiations. Tell me more about that, because negotiation is so essential in our professional life, our personal life. It's pervasive.
It is, and women don't usually do as well as men do at negotiation. There have been several studies done, and professors at business schools looking into how women negotiate versus how men do. It turns out that there's no real genetic or sociological difference when both sexes have the same amount of information. So when they go into a sit on opposite ends of the table or across from each other, and they say it's about a salary, and they know what that position usually pays, and they know what the field pays, and they know what their competitors pay, men and women tend to do the same. Where women do not do well is because, A, they hate to talk about their salary, and they never share their salary. They'd rather talk about sex than money, as far as I've noted. I just don't quite get it. But men will talk about money and salary much more readily with their peers and with colleagues and with networking groups. So women are uninformed. Women also don't necessarily know as much about the field or the strategy that a competitor is there trying to push forward, if it's not about being hired, or compensation if it's some other kind of negotiation. Information is key. Yeah. And therefore, women tend to give up sooner than men do. Men know what that bottom line is. They know what they should be getting, whatever that negotiation is, and they'll just keep going until it happens. Women give up and they say, well, okay, I see I'm not winning here. I'm walking away. So that's one. It's about being around the groups that are important and that will help you, support you with the information you have. The other thing, and this is a Deborah Tannen, the woman who's done so much in terms of gender language and written several bestsellers, who's a professor at Georgetown University, kind of the godmother of gender talk. Mm-hmm. She has found that when young girls sit and talk about things, they tend to face each other. And they have a lot of body language, and they have a lot of eye contact, and they're close to each other. When boys talk to each other, they sit side by side. There's no eye contact. There's no particular interaction of body language. And it's her theory that if women who were negotiating sat on the same side as the table as the men and didn't make that eye contact, which the men find somehow aggressive and upsetting, they might do better.
Isn't that interesting? Because the behavior is the childlike behavior, one would think is not something that they learned, right? This is just natural, innate behavior.
Or boys are taught not to be too intimate.
Even at a young age.
Even at a young age. I mean, I think that kind of role playing. Don't cry. You're 3 years
Yeah,
old.
that's a good point. Yeah, and observing, other male role models in their lives. Fascinating, fascinating. So, Joanna, let's hear your take. What can we as men and women learn from each other when it comes to communicating better in the workplace?
Well, we've touched on some of this. The idea that women should cut their losses and just move on and don't harbor, don't go back, and don't second guess. Something I'm working on, I confess, a lot.
Is it challenging for you?
Yeah, I tend to remember the hurts,
Yeah.
and I tend to think over my mistakes, and I tend to make a decision and think, was that the right one? Should I have done X instead of Y? And
Yeah.
I do think it's much more female driven than male. It's not to say that men don't second guess or they don't get hurt, but there is some ability to more resilience in
Yes.
these regards.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because they know that men know that they have more opportunity than women. Women worry about blowing an opportunity because there aren't as many. There's an old metaphor that says that women think about money as a pool that can be drained and then they're done, it's dry. Men think about money as a faucet that you can turn on and off.
Well, that's fascinating. Wow. Wow.
So if that's the case, women are not necessarily wrong.
Yeah.
Men do have more access to income and saving and money and all those kinds of things that are going to bolster their affluence in their retirement, and then women do in the workplace. And of course, women tend to go in and out of the workplace as well, taking care of relatives, taking care of kids.
Yeah.
So all that has some basis in reality as well as emotion. In terms of learning from each other, women should cut to the chase. Don't ask so many questions. You don't need to validate everything. You don't need to be perfect. Women should probably learn a little bit more about reining in emotion. Men should learn more about speaking emotionally. Don't try and tamp it down totally. If something has happened in the office that's upsetting and they don't acknowledge it, I think it doesn't do well for the entire workforce. Everyone knows it's happened, and pretending it doesn't is just some kind of time bomb, I think. So men need to acknowledge their feelings and acknowledge that women are having, a different response. One of the things that also tends to happen is that we bring into the workplace a little bit of our home relationships. I know I said I was going to talk about that, but
it's inevitable, though, isn't it? I think that's just part of being human.
I think so too. And again, no matter if it's a same-sex couple or a heterosexual couple, there's probably power issues. And the power issues are the kind of gender issues that play out in the workplace. So if someone is upset at home because his or her partner is not doing his share or not adding or spending too much money, some of that is going to rub off on the person in the office who is your intimate or your supervisor or your subordinate, because we tend to build those relationships out of familiarity.
Right, right. Joanna, what a joy to have you on. It's always a pleasure. You've got great information to share. Tell us how we can follow you online and more about your podcast so we can listen to you.
Thank you so much. My website is womensplaybook.com, Women's Playbook. And I have a book coming out in January called Being Equal Doesn't Mean Being the Same.
Ah, great. We'll have you back on the show to talk about the book.
I'd love to do that. The information about how to get it and when it's coming out will be on the website. The podcasts are on iTunes under the Women's Playbook.
Wonderful. Joanna Krotz, thank you so much. I wish you continued great success. I hope our professional paths cross again. And truly, let's have you back on when the book is launched.
That would be lovely. I wish you well.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in to Your Working Life, where my goal is to help you design your career destiny so it doesn't happen by default. True career and life satisfaction is possible, and it's time to embrace what you love doing so you can do more of it. Your Working Life is now available on iTunes, YouTube, Podbean, and Stitcher. Please leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you, and I appreciate your feedback. I'm Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Take good care.